Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, constant reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, he's the 32nd whole person. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Well, maybe I look whole on the outside, Scott, but ever since that tragic loss in my past, I haven't been whole, man.
It's really depressing. I didn't expect the intro to go here. I just was making a joke about how you're the last competitor and we're going to fight to the death now, but okay.
It's not a lot of easily at hand comedy around the idea of being the 32nd whole person. You've got to reach a little bit, you know?
Yeah, no, it's fair. I really set you up for horrible depression. So that's good.
Yeah.
This week on the show, Fairy Tale continues as we discuss chapters 19 through 23 of Stephen King's novel. After getting lost in Lilymar, Charlie and the newly invigorated Radar make a mad dash for the city gate. Radar is able to escape, but unfortunately, Charlie is trapped, and he finds himself in a prison arc and a battle royale arc all at the same time. What's more, Matt, his hair is now all golden yellow and stuff. Prince Charlie's here. He's definitely here.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think of this week's reading?
He's going Super Saiyan.
Oh God! Stop.
Okay, so the weird thing about this week's reading is that I actually really enjoyed this week's reading, and part of that is because I am a huge sucker for any kind of prison arc, and I really liked a lot of the creepy undead stuff. Mm-hmm. I had a hard time figuring out what we're doing with this book, or how any of this kind of meshes with the book that we've been reading up to this point. And this isn't even me saying and that's why I hated it. It's no, I just said I enjoyed reading it. It just makes it. I found as I was doing the notes for this week, I was just I guess we're doing something with this. But the script, this week's script, is populated with just the most inane commentary from me. So I'll try to come up with something better to say in the moment.
Yeah, no, I think I'm with you on this. Where there's a part of me that wonders if had we been covering this book as we normally cover books, and I had already read it, if I could have been pointing out the bits and pieces of stuff earlier in the book that perhaps led to where we are in the story right now. Because obviously I didn't see those things with you as we were reading this book. My reaction to this section was, oh, this is the part that makes people not like the book. Which is funny because it's not to say I didn't enjoy this section. I was really on board with all of this stuff. I do agree with you. You know, we made a lot of educated guesses last week about what we think this book is doing, where we think this book is going. I think we still are right on some of them. I think some of the things we said and some of the things we mused on last week got reinforced this week, which always feels good. But a lot of the other stuff very much makes me go, huh, okay, what are we doing? And because this is week 5, episode 5. We have 2 more book sections left, and then we have our overview episode. So essentially, next week is the penultimate episode of this book. We're nearing the end of this novel, and I'm trying to think of okay, so jumping ahead to predictions, but let's say next week is going to be the prison break. My guess is they're probably going to go through the first round of the tournament. Charlie is perhaps going to have to kill someone, and then we're going to get to the prison break after that. And then it's okay, but where do we go from there? And how much of this part is going to be the book, you know? Mm-hmm. And I find myself very confused and very unsure of what's going to happen and where we're going. And it's not that I dislike it, but yeah, I agree with you. When making the script myself, I was here's this, and this, but I didn't necessarily have and this is what I think the book is doing with this. Ultimately, I have no clear answer on what I think the book is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. This is a thing I've noticed more and more too as we've done more King books, is like one of my main tools for predicting what's going to happen in a book is asking, like, well, what is this character's arc and what is this character's character flaw? Mm-hmm. Those are almost two sides of the same coin in terms of the question. And realizing that King doesn't think about writing that way. Like, not that the characters don't often have arcs, but I don't think he structures his stories around the arcs. So I don't really fully understand what Charlie's flaw is meant to be and how that's meant to come into play here. And thus I can't really say where he's going to end up. This story could still end up tonally kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I think it's fun to be this confused because it lets us dig a little more urgently, maybe.
Yeah. I think so too. And again, part of me wonders, like, not wonders, I am 100% certain that this is the part of the book that really turned people off. Like, I'm thinking back on the comments I read from people that said, I really liked the first half and I really didn't like the second half. And now in my head, I'm saying, I really like what they're actually saying without spoiling is, I really liked everything up to the prison part. And then I stopped liking the book. And I am still in a position where I don't agree with that sentiment. Like, I do enjoy this stuff, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes from here and how it wraps all this up and kind of finding a way to tie the first 200 pages back to these last 200 pages is going to be interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Let's get into it then. Before we do that, though, we just had one thing I wanted to talk about briefly. We're coming near the end of the show. I think we've got, 4 episodes to go, including this one. This is the whatever the fourth to last is called. And the movie Salem's Lot came out this weekend, so I went out and watched that movie, and I talked about it on Twitter briefly. And I know you kind of asked me, should I watch this movie? And I guess what I wanted to do here was kind of talk about what perhaps our coverage of things looks like going forward into the future after the end of the show. Because Salem's Lot in particular is a movie based on a book that we covered on the show, covered very extensively. And it feels like we made choices as we were covering books to cover the adaptation on the book, but some of them hadn't existed yet, right? So I was just thinking about, like, if we should talk about the Salem's Lot movie on this podcast. And I kind of want to, but I also don't want to, like, break the flow of what we do here with our everyday programming. So my thought on this was that, like, when the show does come to an end and we've got Flanagan's Wake coming and we're going to be going through with that, there might be opportunities here and there to talk about random one-off things and have random one-off episodes. And I guess I just wanted to get the audience's feedback on that. Like, what do y'all think about that? Would that be something you would enjoy? Like, that occasionally this podcast feed that won't be releasing weekly episodes, it's like, there's a new adaptation of It, or the Welcome to Derry show. And we pop up with an episode or two to talk about that stuff. How would y'all feel about that? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? You know what I mean, Matt?
Yeah. I'd like to hear people's thoughts on this as well. Obviously, there's all sorts of different ways this could look, but y'all's feedback might help us shape the form that this takes.
Yeah. So just let us know a preview of whatever that Salem's Lot conversation ends up being. Is bad. It's not a good movie. I was really disappointed by it.
I haven't seen it, so maybe we can have a full conversation. Maybe I'll love it. Maybe.
I hope so, actually. Yeah. I do hope so.
Okay.
Speaking of which, I think Castle Talk is coming to an end next week, right? I think that's when we normally record the episodes. So it'll a week from today, essentially, our final 2 episodes on that will be out. So Matt, remind me to schedule that recording, but also look forward to it. That's our Patreon show talking about the Hulu original series Castle Rock. We'll be doing the last 2 episodes of season 2, which you have already watched. I haven't rewatched them yet, but we also haven't recorded yet.
Yep. And then we'll be totally done with the entirety of that TV show.
Yeah, which is a little sad, but maybe a little fitting.
Yeah.
All right. Enough announcements. Let's get into the show. Let's talk about these chapters of Fairy Tale. We begin with chapter 19, The Trouble with Dogs, The Pedestal, The Graveyard, The Outer Gate. Matt, we pick up with Charlie and Radar right where they left off. Peterkin has erased Bodit's breadcrumb trail out of the city, and as the day wanes, they're lost inside it. I really love Charlie's monologue at the beginning on this trouble with dogs that makes it into the chapter title here. Like, this idea that you're running along in a panic with this young, newly refreshed dog that's just like living life and just like, yeah, this is great. Everything's good. And my master's following me out of here, and I feel good and everything's awesome. It really helps create this dichotomy and emotion between dog and master. Like, and that really helps, in my opinion, stress and emphasize the sheer panic that Charlie is feeling.
I felt exactly the same. I thought it was a fantastic technique to help you empathize with his actual terror, that he's like having to hide it. This is just like an interesting thing you notice about, I think, the way human drama operates, is that it's way more compelling to watch someone try not to cry than it is to watch them cry. Mm-hmm. And I think it's similarly compelling to watch Charlie try to keep a lid on it while he's wigging out for the sake of the dog. Like, that, like you just said, that worked on me really well.
Yeah. I love this line. Like, he's looking at the dog and looking at the happy face of the dog, and he says, "You trusted a fool." I thought, worse luck for you, honey. Mm-hmm. I think honey really stuck out to me there, because that's not a phrase he uses very often, especially in relation to the dog. But I think it does just reflect his desperation, that like he's really trying to emphasize like the disconnect between him and the dog. So he's using a term I don't think he would normally use for the dog.
I think you're right. What's funny, in this moment, I found myself wondering, like, what does Radar think about all this? Like, is Radar aware of what just happened on any level? And I wasn't expecting to get a peek into Radar's mind at any point, but was pleasantly surprised later when we actually did.
Yeah. No, that's so fun. I can't wait to talk about that a little bit. So Matt, like, he's calling himself a fool, right? He's calling himself an idiot, a fool for getting into this situation. But for a fool, Charlie does a pretty good job here, right? Like, he develops a plan. He climbs on this big fountain in the middle of an area and sits on there kind of waiting for the nightly monarch butterfly roost, I guess, for lack of a better phrase. He's able to see them burst into the sky and then land, which allows him to orient himself and kind of sort of know, okay, the wall is that way, that's where the gate is, and he figures it out. He goes that way, and he is able to get to the front gate is where the front gate is. So I mean, that's like pretty resourceful, I think.
Yeah, good stuff. I really enjoyed the just functional storytelling of his, this journey through the city, and the problem solving and the obstacle and resolution back and forth of it. Like, it all worked on me really well. I love the idea that it's the butterflies that save him, because the butterflies are sort of a symbol for these Galleon royals. Yeah. And so it's not only is it a practical, clever solution, but there's a symbolic resonance to it that I enjoyed.
Yeah, no, good point. The butterflies are obviously extremely important. We kind of get that set up when he's talking to Hamey about, is it Hamey? You're going to have to tell me how these names are pronounced.
I think it was Hamey. Yeah. Okay. In fact, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Hamey.
Okay. So we see the importance of the butterflies there for the people. And so, yeah, we understand that they have both metaphorical power and symbolic power and real actual power as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So eventually they're forced to cut through a graveyard just as night falls. And we see, Matt, zombies like rising from the grave. Like, these aren't the night soldiers, by the way. We think at the beginning, oh, maybe these are the night soldiers, but I don't think these are the night soldiers. I think these are just, normal zombies.
Yeah. It's just the undead. Yeah.
What is going on in this town?
Yeah. Isn't it interesting how little we know about that? I appreciated that both the boy and his dog reacted about the way we would probably react in this situation, which is just like absolute horror and disgust.
Yeah. I love the detail of when Radar's barks switch from like certain intonation to another.
Uh-huh.
Like, because I mean, anyone that has had a dog knows that, like, you begin to learn your dog's barks just like you begin to learn your children's cries, and you can tell what is a playful bark, what is a defensive bark, and what is a I'm scared out of my mind bark.
Yeah.
And I love that King adds that detail there.
Yeah, me too.
So, I mean, this is all pretty tense, right? Like, suddenly he's rushing for the door. The night soldiers he sees are heading, like, these blue kind of auras in the background rushing towards them, as he runs for the gate. And I love this. I love this part right here. For 30 yards or so, I even pulled ahead of radar. Then she caught up again and looked over at me. No, big. No, big isn't this fun grin on her chops now. Her eyes were flat against her skull, and white rings showed around her brown eyes. She looked terrified.
Uh-huh.
And so that, like, we talked about at the beginning of the chapter how this disconnect between Charlie's panic and Radar's calm, complacent happiness really drives home how he's feeling. But, like, her meeting him where he's at also really serves to accentuate, like, how bad this has actually got. It's like, it's so bad now that even the dog's freaking out.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's in the back of our minds, I think, that this is a big, scary dog. So
it's a German Shepherd, right? This is not a little Chihuahua.
Yeah. So her being scared, I think, helps you be scared. I mean, I think any situation that I'm in where a German shepherd is with me and the German Shepherd is scared, I should be very scared.
Yeah. I think that's definitely fair. All right, so Matt, we get our first look at the night soldiers. And we see here, I looked back and really saw them for the first time. 20 or more men with maroon lips the color of dried blood and parchment pale faces. They were dressed in loose pants and shirts that looked weirdly like army fatigues. That blue light was gushing from their eyes, spilling downward, coating them. They had features like ordinary men, but they were gauzy. I could glimpse the skulls beneath. What do you think about these night soldiers, Matt?
I have so many thoughts about these night soldiers. So I want to talk about the tone and the aesthetic of kind of all of this, gesturing vaguely over all of this, because, like, I had this very immediate and specific mental image based on this description, which was like, oh, these are the men of Dunharrow. These are the men under the mountain from specifically the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies.
Yes.
Which in their case, they're they have a spectral green aura and they're translucent. You can see their features, but you can also see the skeleton underneath. And just overall, like, setting aside whether or not, like, that's the specific sort of image that he's going for, there's something very, like, retro about the depiction of these night soldiers. Like, it's like he's consciously trying to make them come off as if they're from, like, a cheesy rotoscoped horror movie from the 50s.
Interesting.
Yeah, let me know if you saw any of what I'm describing in my mind's eye here.
I didn't, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Once again, we'll talk about how my brain works differently and how I don't see things the way you see things when you read stuff. So I didn't see that, but, like, the second you mention it, I'm like, it kind of clicked together for me that I feel like that's probably correct, because it is. I mean, we'll get into these guys more when we get into the prison itself, but, like, there's such interesting design things, right? They're like skeletons that glow blue, and that aura is, like, I think Charlie calls it, like, electricity, right? It's like they're being powered by this aura, and getting too close of it is like being electrified. They wear makeup, or at least one of them wears makeup to try to hide some of the skeleton portion of themselves, right? And they have names like Aaron. So it's just, they're really, really fascinating things that I just did not expect at all.
Yeah, I guess I'll bring up another element of all of this that is kicking around in my head, which is that, they're described as having army fatigues, basically.
Yeah.
In a minute, we're going to see that one of them has a golf cart, which, on top of being cheesy and campy and kind of fitting in with this idea that maybe King is trying to make this look like have the visual aesthetic of some kind of retro throwback movie, like there's an implication that these guys are more modern than the rest of Impus, that they're electrical. They're surrounded by an electrical aura. They have a go-kart, or a golf cart rather. And I'm like, are we meant to take this literally? Like, are these guys from Earth, or is this, I don't think that's it, honestly, but it does give you this sense of like, they're just different from the normal way that this world works. They could be from Earth. That's entirely possible.
Yeah, right? I mean, this is the whole thing is so confusing because we were introduced to this world in a very intentionally Wizard of Oz-y kind of way. We're really leaning into the fantasy portion of the fairy story, and we've continually found as we've gone further and further and eventually deeper and deeper into the city that things aren't quite like that. The first hint was the trolley system running on electricity. Now we see, when we get into this palace, we'll see some of the floors are run by electricity powered by people on treadmills. And then yeah, you have this golf cart. You have these skeletons are distinct and separate from just the everyday zombies we see rising from the grave. So it seems like there's something specifically, like maybe not even magic, but just technological powering these guys. And it all raises a lot of questions, for sure. Questions despite the number of bits of world building we get this week, are really unanswered.
Yeah, right. Like I'm still honestly like is it magic or is it technology? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out. I don't want to find out like too much though. Like I honestly think this isn't a real complaint, but I think that there's a lot of exposition in these chapters that we got today. There's a lot of stuff that King's dropping on us. He's using a lot of these prisoner characters we're about to meet as like a way of explaining the world to Charlie for the first time. And I want to get a little bit more, but I don't want to get too much. I don't want to get too into the weeds of like the details of this place and how it works.
Yeah.
So
sounds good.
All right, so Charlie manages to get the door open in time, but just as he's about to outrun the night soldiers, as you said, one comes with a sort of golf cart-like device with a fire bell attached to it. This is Kellen, who we'll get to meet in a little bit. But basically what happens here is Radar is able to slip through the door in time, the slowly opening door. But just as Charlie is about to slip through, he's grabbed by Kellen, and the Radar gets away.
Yep, and Charlie is sort of electrocuted, sort of. Mm-hmm. Unclear. Again, confused. We'll see.
Yeah. The other thing I did want to talk about here is what he says to her. To Charlie. He says, "No, Kitty," the undead night soldier whispered. "No, whole one. You've come to the Lily uninvited, and here you will stay." So I wanted to talk about Kitty with you, because like this is a thing that all the night soldiers do to all of the prisoners. It starts here with Charlie, but it's all of them. None of these people are children, right? Mm-hmm. Like none of them. Charlie, I guess, is probably the closest at 17, but he doesn't, like a 17-year-old man looks like a man, like, right? Unless you're specifically told, "Oh, you're 17." Like you just look like an adult, essentially, a young adult, certainly, but an adult. And so I think it feels to me very intentional that we designed these characters with, this is the thing they're going to call the prisoners. They're going to call them Kitty. And it goes back to, in my estimation, one thing that you talked about weeks ago was like, is this a story about him rediscovering childhood innocence? Is he being, and another part of this is perhaps is part of the transformation that we see happening here to Prince Charlie. De-aging him is the wrong word, because I don't think he's actually like physically being de-aged, but like de-adultifying, I guess. I don't know how to phrase it.
Yeah, restoring his innocence, restoring a sense of magic in the world.
Yeah.
I do like that you pulled out, that you're emphasizing the use of kitty, because it's very unusual. It doesn't really strike me as being like from anything. It's not like it's a standard British colloquialism or something to call people kitty when they're like, of a lesser status than you or something. It's and it kind of I guess it's like, this is a fairy tale, right? Like, this one thing I kept thinking, not just this week, but maybe for some reason more this week than usual. Like, this is not a fantasy novel. This is a fairy tale novel. Like, that's the specific thing that King is trying to do, is channel the specific ideas of fairy tales.
Yeah.
Which are distinct from the specific ideas of fantasy novels. Like, fantasy novels have their own tradition. That is not what we're doing. So the idea of it being, it's like there's something very Hansel and Gretel about like kitty as a phrase. Not that the witch even called them kitty, but I just mean like vibes wise, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to capture. I mean, I think we are trying to capture this situation in which it's children captured and made to fight, like in a fairy tale type thing, but also in like a battle royale, Hunger Games-esque Gladiator tournament arc thing. Like, it seems that without ever actually directly doing it, it seems like we're wanting this to feel like these are children made to do this when none of them are children. That's the interesting part to me. But the kitty is the thing that seems to emphasize this without saying it outright.
Yeah. It's interesting. I I didn't think of this until this moment, but it seems to me that a lot of fairy tales involve an imprisonment of some form. Like Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel, even Rumpelstiltskin. Just first three that come to mind. Those are like the first three fairy tales that come to mind, other than Jack and the Beanstalk, and they all involve imprisonment and being freed from that imprisonment, either through cleverness or thinking outside the box. And even Jack and the Beanstalk is he's not freeing himself, but he's freeing others, right? So it's a very common theme in these stories, actually. Yeah,
I think you're right. All right, Matt, as we end this chapter, I did have one question for you. So there's this line here. One shouted a word. I thought it was Elimar, a combination of Empis and Lilimar, but now I know better. Did I just miss, like, this is not, I don't think this is a thing that is resolved in this week's reading, is it? Like, what they were actually saying? I was like looking through the names of people and I was like, what could this have been that he thought he heard but didn't? And I didn't come up with anything.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just blanking on, I certainly didn't hear anything that was an explicit reference to this. And if we're meant to just infer it, I'm not there yet. I didn't get it.
If our listeners know and they want to tell us, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right, so we move on to chapter 20, Durant's Vial, Hamey, Feeding Time, the Lord High, Interrogation. Matt, this chapter begins with Charlie dreaming of Radar's moments immediately after his capture, but they're written from the perspective of Radar herself, inside Radar's head. There was a moment, and I think you already talked about this, but there was a moment where I thought we were going to get like a full-on doggy chapter. Like the rest of this chapter was going to be from the perspective of the dog, and I got very, very excited actually for a doggy chapter. All the best books have a chapter from the perspective of a dog.
It's true.
But unfortunately the chapter ends really just after it begins, or this portion of the chapter rather. I was also absolutely crestfallen that we didn't have a doggy chapter. I do want to just say here though, like the thing that immediately became clear to me, and I wanted to make sure it was clear to you, that these aren't just dreams. Like Charlie just interprets this as, oh, I'm just dreaming because I'm really wishing Radar got out and okay, and I'm worried about her, so I'm in my dreams inventing what happened to her. That's not what's happening here, right? Like, this is just what Radar did immediately after escaping, and Charlie is seeing it, feeling it. It's being beamed into his head in some way, right? And like he later has a dream with Leia in it, and like the same thing's happening there, in my estimation. Like, these are, we already know that Leia has like the ability to like throw her thoughts. So like this is, to me, just what's happening.
Yeah, I thought this is definitely Warg stuff, right? That he's got some telepathic bond with Radar. The only real question to me is like, why and why now? Like Leia communicating with him psychically is less mysterious because we know that she can do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is it just that he has a special bond with Radar? Is it that he has a bit of the shine? Is it just because he's in this castle and magic? And I don't know that it matters that much. I just kind of think it's fun and appropriate in a story like this that he would have this sort of bond.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's just like, I mean, the actual like possible rational explanation of this is just like Lily has shining power and she was able to like extend her shining power to allow them to have this brief moment where they check on each other and make sure each other's okay or something. But yeah, it could also be like, if this is a power that everyone in the royal family has and Charlie is slowly turning into Prince Charlie, perhaps it's a thing that he's gaining as he's fulfilling this role of the story.
Yeah, that sounds extremely plausible, actually. Yeah.
So Charlie wakes up and he finds himself in a prison. Matt, I kind of love how much King throws at you right away here. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense until later. Like, Charlie wakes up, he's kind of muddled, and he hears people talking. He hears people saying Charlie is 31, but will never have 64, but he's 31. And you don't know what the fuck all that means at first. But it's just like, it's just confusing enough without being completely overwhelming that you're kind of hooked in on it. Like, well, I want to know what 31 means. What is 64? What do these things mean?
I definitely did not just like brilliantly jump to the correct conclusion, by the way. I was not like, multiples of 2. It's a tournament. No, it took until somebody explained it to me.
Yeah.
I agree. You were confused in the same way that Charlie is confused.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like this as well. Drance Vile, I thought. I didn't know where that phrase came from. Wasn't even sure I knew what it meant. Okay, so we know what it means, right? Because we have a thing called Google. And Durance Vile is an old, archaic, no longer used phrase that basically just means a long prison sentence. Like, that's what it means. If you were saying someone was in a Durance Vile, they were a very, very long prison sentence. But I mean, the interesting thing about this is like, where is this coming from? Like, Charlie just thinks this phrase randomly and he doesn't know what it means. Where is it coming from?
Yeah, I didn't know what to make of this. I've never heard this phrase before either, but like,
that's because nobody uses it anymore.
Right. It's funny because I didn't even understand from context in the story that this is like a real phrase. I thought this was like a, Empus weird language phrase maybe, but it's I'm totally being honest. I thought it was a made up phrase from the audiobook, but it's like, no, this is just English.
Yeah.
it's just very, very archaic.
Yeah.
And
I kept like waiting for the book to tell us what it meant, because obviously the first thing I did was Google it and determine that it was a real phrase and this is what it means, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. But the book, at least up until this point, doesn't like ever say, and Charlie realized that meant a long prison sentence. What this is doing, by the way, my conclusion about exactly what's happening here is this is King kind of his first bit of gesturing towards this thing that will take a larger and larger role in the book through the next few chapters, of Charlie essentially simultaneously existing in 2 languages and 2 versions of himself. Like, he's saying things in his head that are coming out of his mouth differently. He's looking different now. When he reads things on the walls, he can kind of tell that they are in a language that's not English, but his mind's eye is seeing them in English unless he looks at them like from a certain direction, or like something is happening as part of his transformation that is changing the way his mind works. And this random archaic phrase popping into his head is, in my mind, supposed to be part of that. Yeah,
I agree. He's undergoing a transformation, and this is part of that. Yeah.
So Charlie's cellmate is a man named Hamey, who, like Charlie, is a whole person, but unlike Charlie, is not doing too well. He's clearly seriously ill with a stomach issue that, as we learn that these people are going to have to fight to the death soon, will make that pretty bad for him.
Yeah, we get the idea that maybe he ate the wrong thing and his body is messed up as a consequence of that. And I kind of wonder if we're meant to take that at face value, not to be paranoid again, but it's just an interest. I guess the reason I'm like hung up on it is like it's just an interesting character touch to be like, yeah, they've got all these captives and one of them just has this horrible gut issue, which I guess it's just like why do that, I guess. And it's like, well, you want to give somebody a disability so that Charlie has to be the big man and protect him, and that
yeah,
it's kind of how you do that, right? So
yeah, but I think you're onto something here, because I'm not saying I don't want to go full conspiracy theory with this, but it is interesting that we kind of don't get a clear explanation of this ever. Like the book takes the time to have Hamey and Charlie have a conversation about his gut problems, and it's like, oh, is it something you got from the food you ate in here? And Hamey's like, no, I'm pretty sure I had it before I got in here. Like the thing he says in this chapter is like, it's probably those mushrooms I ate. And of course he's been in prison for a while and hasn't had mushrooms in a long time, but is just supposing that it's the mushrooms that he ate before he got captured that are doing this to him, but he doesn't know. And that just drew attention to it in a way that I kind of, like, my ears perked up a little bit. And I was like, are we doing something with this? I don't think so. But
the only possibility that I can think of is that he, one of the other prisoners knows that when there's 32 of them, they're going to have a Hunger Games. So whatever prisoner this is like, well, I've just got to keep that number down. I don't have to kill everybody, but I gotta, if I can knock off one or two people, and then that resets the count a little bit. So you could see a revelation at some point in the story where one of these other prisoners has a tearful confession of like, I poisoned you. And, now maybe they're sorry they did that. Maybe they didn't mean it to be this horrible lingering sickness. I'm probably overthinking this, but it's like plausible within the story, right? Yeah.
Yeah, very plausible. I think we're probably overthinking it, but I would be lying if I said those thoughts didn't occur to me either. So, yeah. So Hamey essentially serves as like an exposition fairy here a little bit, Matt, catching Charlie up on and us up on what's happening here. We learn they're in a place called Deep Maline. Am I pronouncing that right, Matt? I don't know how to pronounce any of these words.
Yeah, that was right.
Deep Maline, a prison deep under the palace, run by the Lord High, who serves Flight Killer. So we know that name, but we're deep under the city of Lillimar, under the palace of Lillimar in Deep Maline now.
Very fun. I really enjoy that we're in a FromSoft game where the dungeons just go down and down deep into the earth. I wonder what is the deepest dungeon that ever really existed in a real castle?
I don't know.
Like, 2 stories below the ground at most, I imagine.
Yeah, they probably just couldn't dig down very far, right?
Unless there were like natural caves that they were building on top of, which you got to imagine happened at least once. But yeah, sure. I don't think they were in the business of undermining their own foundations with a bunch of tunnels.
But this one is really deep, right? The way the book describes it is they were walking upstairs for like 45 minutes. And Charlie's like exhausted by the end of this. So like they're really, really far down there.
Yeah, that was something that jumped out to me too. I was like, what is this place where they have, like, it didn't seem that, from the surface, it seemed like sort of almost, medieval fantasy. And then it's like, no, they have this enormous, basically like dungeon complex underground. By the way, it puts a little bit of a negative complexion on the Galleon royal family that they have such extensive dungeons. Why do you need the dungeon? Why did the dungeons need to be bigger than the city?
No, Matt. No. I mean, you have a point here actually, because there's 31 people in these dungeons, right?
Yeah.
Like, why they got to go down that far? It's not like they could very
Right.
easily live closer to the surface in one of the many apartments in the palace. Like you can still make them prisoner and treat them like shit if that's what's important to you. But like it seems both symbolically for the book, but also like part of their punishment is you're really far away from the surface here.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of theater and like this is the way it is done here
Yeah.
when it comes to the way these people behave.
Mm-hmm. So there are 30 other prisoners here, but the only other one we get introduced to right now, Matt, is a prisoner named I, or his actual name is Iota, who we see as like primarily like I think he's like the biggest guy there, and we see him as kind of being set up as Charlie's natural antagonist, but we'll kind of see later that doesn't actually happen that way. What do you think, Matt, about Iota?
Well, I think I is a terrible name in context of listening to an audiobook.
Why do you mean that?
Every single time the audiobook reader says, I ran across the room and grabbed the pail.
I didn't even think about that.
You're like, oh, he doesn't mean I did it because it's a first person book to remind everyone. So,
yes.
So it's incredibly distracting. And I kept actually making the mistake that there were honestly so many moments when I was like later in the story when Claw shows up, I thought that I was so confused about what had happened because it was Claw had like done something to I, and the whole interaction was just lost on me. I had to like rewind to understand what actually was supposed to have happened. Don't name your characters I. We had the same problem in that Ursula Le Guin book, Left Hand of Darkness, but that was less of a problem because I don't remember if that was a first-person novel. Anyway,
I have no idea.
Let's move on. I think he's a great character. Setting that aside, I think the trope here is like the cellmate that he's kind of rough, and you got to win him over, but then ultimately he becomes a boon companion. It's like Red in, Shawshank.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we're playing with a lot of the prisoner tropes here. I mean, that is one thing. I think we kind of talked about this at the beginning of the episode, but just emphasize it more here. It does very much feel like we've stepped out of a fairy tale specifically and into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Which again is not necessarily a bad thing, but it felt like we were really for the past 4 weeks really leaning into the fairy tale nature of all this. Like, especially last week, we talked about Three Little Pigs, like the Jack and the Beanstalk was there. Like every character we run into is a character from a fairy tale. And none of this feels fairy tale at all. Yes, it feels like, as we talked about, like Battle Royale-esque, like Hunger Games-esque, like any kind of prison arc. Like I feel I get a lot of Andor here as well from the prison section of Andor, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later.
Uh-huh.
But I don't feel a lot of specific fairy story in what's going on in the book right now.
Yeah. I don't feel it either. It's a tone thing, right? Because I just mentioned how a lot of fairy tales do have like a prison imprisonment, if not like an actual prison. There's imprisonment, but it doesn't feel like this. Like this just feels like a straight up tropey prison prior to prison escape story.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree.
Yeah. All right, Matt, it's playtime for the other 30 characters, but Charlie is summoned to the office of the Lord High Kellen for an interesting interview. Before we do this, though, Charlie gets to see firsthand that electric glowing blue aura around the Night Soldiers. We already talked about this a little bit, but I mean, do you think we're going to get a full-on explanation, and perhaps this is a scientific explanation of what these guys are?
No. I mean, I feel like King never really goes into detail on how any kind of magic works.
Fair.
The only question I really want an answer to is like, did Flight Killer do this? Is this a Gog Magog thing? Are those questions even coherent? And like, is this technology or is it magic? I guess those are my only real questions.
Yeah. I think we'll get explanations of that kind, but probably not much further than that.
Cool.
So Charlie is led up a long staircase into a part of the palace that looks well maintained, actually. There's actually some electricity here, too. Just real electricity. Cool.
Yeah. It's surprising, too. Because I'm like, there's electricity here? You know? Mm-hmm. That's not something I expected in this fantasy world.
Yeah.
Was the electricity always here, or is this a retrofit from Flight Killer? Like, is this a new thing? Did electricity come to the world with whatever Flight Killer brought out of the deep well, or I don't know.
Good question. We just don't know. I think it is very interesting how, especially in these chapters, Charlie is kind of trying to piece together the history of this world and how all these things happen and how this place became the way it is. But yeah, it's still very unclear which parts of it are things that were brought later to it and things that were always there, and are just like last vestiges of the former ways.
Right.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Kellen, though, isn't quite an interesting character, Matt. He's found wearing a red smoking jacket, and we see clearly that, like, when we first met him driving the golf cart, he was like full on skeleton / vampire guy. But now he looks healthy. He's got rosy cheeks. He's got combed hair. He's got skin. We see, I think Charlie kind of quickly realizes that this is partially, if not mostly, makeup. But that in and of itself is something interesting, that they were kind of defining this character as clearly a guy that is undead, that he is like all the other night soldiers, but he doesn't want to be considered like the other night soldiers, right?
Yeah, exactly. My take, which I admit could just be a bunch of projection on my part, is that maybe Kellen like wishes he were just alive, the normal way. Like, it pisses him off that his body is gross and dead. And like, it seems plausible that maybe in whatever this coup was, whatever this coup looked like that he was a part of, when he was enticed to this rebellion, was part of it agreeing like, oh, and I will give you eternal life. And he's like, oh, hell yeah, eternal life. And then the eternal life turns him into a horrible, rotting zombie. Tale as old as time. Your boss offers you immortality in exchange for service, but there's some horrible catch. That there also seemed to be, and maybe this is like really me reading between the lines, but there seemed to be a little bit of like aggravation with Flight Killer. Like he's, on the one hand, he gives Flight Killer all of the proper like formal obeisance and title and so forth, but there were a couple of lines in there, I couldn't even remember them if you asked. There were a couple of lines that made me think that maybe there's a little irritation there with Flight Killer. Yeah,
I got that vibe too. Like, he's definitely seems like the kind of guy that runs on fear, not respect. Like, people don't listen to Flight Killer because they particularly like him. They listen to Flight Killer because they maybe have to. And that goes into, I think a lot of the stuff goes into how exactly these night soldiers were created or born or what have you. And learning that will, I think, help define them a little bit. But I do agree with your assessment on Kellen, and it makes him pretty interesting. And I read the same thing, that he's got a little chip on his shoulder when it comes to the great Lord Flight Killer.
Cool.
But we got to talk about this, Matt, because as they're drinking tea, we get this line: I raise my cup to Kellen. Long days and pleasant nights I drank. It was sweet and good. What an interesting toast. I've never heard it before. I learned it from my father. This was true. I thought not much else I might say in this richly appointed room would be the truth, but that was. He'd read it in some book or other, but I didn't intend to say that. Maybe the sort of person I was supposed to be couldn't read. Okay, Matt. I mean, okay, let's calm down. Everyone, calm down. Yes, he just said the thing. He did.
He did.
But the question we have to ask ourselves is, does this mean anything? Or is it just King having a little fun? Because the situation he's created here, if you just read this straight, is we're living in a level of the Tower in which the Dark Tower as a novel series exists, and Charlie's father has read it and enjoyed it. And so he says lines from it, and that is all. and it means nothing else, right? That is the straight read of this whole thing. This is a fun Easter egg for Stephen King because he loves to throw Dark Tower references in there, and that's it. But that's not the fun read.
No.
Right?
No, we gotta go crazy with this one.
Yeah. Go for it. Go crazy.
I don't know. I mean, you just laid it out pretty well. Like the alternative is that there's some shenanigans going on where this is a part of the Dark Tower. You know, we're in Midworld. So okay, what I was going to say actually was like the fact that Kellen doesn't recognize Long Days and Pleasant Nights is itself interesting, because if this were any part of Midworld that we were familiar with, he would have said, "And may you have twice the number," and we would have moved on.
Yeah.
Unremarked. But he's like, that is very, very, very strange that you would say that. So that if anything hints that it's, if not strictly not part of Midworld, then at least it's not any of the parts of Midworld that we've seen, right?
Yeah.
So
I agree.
So that's some information.
Mm-hmm. I also think that trying to think of what to say here. I also think that like King is trying to, in my opinion, make it very, very clear that we're not in Midworld through other things. Like one of the things, I didn't pull it out here, but one of the things that these two things happened back to back with me. It was a really interesting experience because I saw he picks up the teacup that he's drinking out of, and on the teacup is a red poppy, right? Uh-huh. And so my head, oh, there's the red poppies again. And then I went, wait a minute. Like we're constantly being peppered with this red poppy imagery, and that feels intentional to me because King knows us constant readers, if he puts a red rose anywhere, we're going to immediately go like, oh, the red rose. So it feels intentional as a kind of a signal to say this is not Midworld by constantly going back to the poppy image and not the rose image. And so almost as if to say like, that's the rose world, this is the poppy world. So I was convinced that this is what he was doing. And then I read the next paragraph and he has a character say Long Days and Pleasant Nights. And I just went, okay, what the fuck? But I do think you're onto something there because yeah, like if he wanted to signal to us that this is Midworld, the easiest way to do that would just be having Kellen reply to us. So almost as if he's specifically signaling that this is not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm going to stick to my guns on what I said before, which is like, this is not Midworld in the sense that like, we're not going to run into, Roland or Patrick Danville or the Crimson King probably, but in a different sense, Midworld is the axis of all of Stephen King's stories. And I'm going to repeat myself, unfortunately, but like the Territories wasn't part of Midworld, and then suddenly it was, right? Mm-hmm. So I think whether something is part of Midworld or not is a sort of ambiguous, fuzzy boundary. And I don't know that we need to like decide the answer to this either. I think it's just very fun that he put this in here because, again, like the first thing you said, what this is telling us is that the Dark Tower novels exist and that his father read them. And I don't know if that means anything or what we're meant to do with that information.
Yeah. I genuinely just believe this is just for fun, and it also specifically doing the things that we already mentioned. I don't think there's something greater going on here. I think King really just likes to have fun with these Easter eggy type things, but certainly could be. This is unfair because I'm bringing outside information into it, but I do believe that if this was like a secret Dark Tower sequel, like that this was just Midworld and this is going to heavily lean into Dark Tower, I would have heard it. Like I would have through osmosis like picked that up, that this is a Dark Tower novel.
Yeah. Well, so prediction wise, I absolutely do not think that there's going to be a part of the story where Charlie looks to the horizon and sees a mysterious dark tower. Like, I don't think we're going to do anything to bridge this with the Dark Tower series. It becomes a completely angels dancing on pins question as to whether we're going to like metaphysically consider this to be part of the Dark Tower. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Fine. I don't think narratively we're going to connect it to the Dark Tower, though. So
Yeah. So on the advice of Hamey, Charlie tells Kellen that he comes from a place called Ullum, apparently an ultra-religious city in this world that committed mass suicide because Stephen King can't write a fucking book without working the Jamestown mass suicide into it. Uh-huh. He can't do it. Yep. Even here, we're in a whole nother world. We went down a well, and we're still talking about Jamestown. So here it is again. This is a place that Charlie claims to be from, although he managed to escape the mass suicide. But of course, Kellen like doesn't buy this at all. Like, right, there's no part of him that buys any bit of the story.
Yeah, he also remarks on Charlie's, just incredibly strange name.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? And again, doesn't make any sort of midworld connection where he's not like, your name means death. That doesn't happen. So I'm just mentioning that because I had previously signposted the idea of like Charlie's name mattering.
Yeah.
And I thought this was interesting because it kind of does matter, but not in the way that I was kind of thinking.
It is. I mean, like jumping ahead quite a bit, but like we see at the very end of this week's reading that Percival, the guard that is feeding them, is like goes by Percy, but their real name is Percival, and it just feels like the Charlie Charles thing. Like it's really interesting for him to specifically call out Charlie as a weird name when, like we said, like Kellen's top undead guard is named Aaron. So like it just, I feel like the specific, like we talked about, you were absolutely right. You talked about Charlie, and I think it is specific. Did we talk about how like Charlie is kind of like in and of itself a child name? I can't remember if we did or not.
No, I mean maybe like several years ago we talked about the notion of like the diminutive form of a name versus the like grown up man form of the name, and how I don't remember what book it was, but there was definitely some other King book where a character like King was actively using the diminutive form to make a point about like the status of this character.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't necessarily think that's as true with Charlie, because I think Charlie is a little bit more commonly like a name that adults use, right? I mean, there's Chaplin.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't know that there's any rules to these things anyway,
but
I mean, yeah, if you've got a name and there's like a nickname form of it, particularly the ones that end with E, I think are viewed as like that's the nickname you use for a child.
Yeah,
typically.
I wouldn't be surprised if people aren't calling him like Prince Charles by the end of this book. Which would fit, because hey, there's one of those right now, and he's the king now. So
yeah, that's right.
All right, so we also learn, Matt, in this conversation that the mermaid that was horribly killed was kind of one of the guardians, essentially, or perhaps the power source of the magic sundial, and her name was Elsa, which is confusing, Matt, because the mermaid is named Ariel, not Elsa. Elsa is the ice queen. Everybody knows that.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
What is King thinking?
Yeah. What an idiot.
Immersion ruined.
Yeah, I agree. This book sucks.
Yeah.
I love what he says here about the sundial. He says, I could send some greys out to break it up with sledges, but the flight killer would have to approve, and so far he hasn't. Petra's whispering in his ear, I suppose. She likes the old sundial. Do you know what magic does, Charlie? I thought it did all sorts of things, allowing hapless pilgrims such as myself to visit other worlds, for instance, but I shook my head. It gives people hope, and hope is dangerous, wouldn't you say? So there's a lot here, Matt. We get the name Petra thrown in, right? I think we also get this perhaps explanation. I think you asked or you pondered last week if the sundial like existed in this world. Why wouldn't people just be using it all the time?
Right.
And also why would it still exist? And we get some answers for that. First of all, I think a lot of the people here are undead, so the sundial serves no use to them. But what about all the other whole people? What about Petra? Who's Petra?
Yeah. Yeah, what about all the people with the gray, for that matter? I mean, not that they have much of a say in things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. We drop a lot of mysteries, and I don't think we get the answer to any of these things this week. So,
yeah, I do really like the idea of magic as hope, and hope being dangerous, at least for these people. Like the metaphor of magic being hope is really interesting to me because, like, you know, if you try to expand this out and or apply it to our world, it's like the belief in the impossible is in essence hope, right? Like, you know, like magic is things that don't make sense or unexplained or, you know, think we can't understand the why of it. And like the belief in that is wanting hope, essentially.
I like that. There's also the fact that the Galleons seem to be way more magical than kind of anything else that we have seen. Like they just seem individually magical.
Yeah. Yeah. So Kellen asked Charlie what else he wanted in Lillimar, and he admits that he was there for gold. He wants the gold, not just gold broadly, but more specifically the little tiny little BB pellets that are apparently in the Lillimar treasury. I think it says something interesting about Bowditch that like he just he just went into the treasury of the capital and just took it. This is where the gold comes from, man. He just filled a 40-pound bucket from this treasury.
Yeah, risked his life to do it.
Yeah.
It's also funny that the palace treasury is just a place that gets robbed sometimes.
Well, I mean, like, does gold... I mean, obviously gold is a currency in this world. That's why it's in the treasury, right? But, like, do any of the people currently living in this city have any need for it whatsoever? Like... And this is another thing we're not sure on. Like, we know, I think his final time he went to the city is when he took the gold, right? Like,
yeah.
So essentially the monarchy had fallen. He's like getting out of Dodge and he goes, let me just run back over here and scoop up a bunch of gold before I leave.
Right. And who knows when that was, like,
yeah,
chronologically. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very strange. I don't know.
Right before he's about to let him go, though, Kellen asks Charlie one last question. He pulls out a wallet and he says, what the hell is this? And Matt, this is actually a payoff of the earlier bit that you and I talked about last week where Charlie was like, oh, thank God this note and my phone were not in my pocket. I put them in my backpack to keep dry because actually we learned that he threw away his backpack as he was trying to escape the city. And so his wallet... The note on how to get to the fountain and his cell phone were not found amongst these things. The only wallet he has in his possession is Christopher Polly's wallet because he fucking broke his wrists and then robbed him.
Yeah, awesome. Which I guess, did we determine whether the picture of Christopher Polly is going to look like the picture of Spritlick or whatever his name is?
Peterkin?
Yeah, Peterkin.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I only ask that because it's like if there's a picture and it's the same guy, then that would be kind of a narratively important piece of information. But yeah. I don't know.
Matt, is Polly gonna come back in the story, do you think?
Well, Scott, this gives me an opportunity to talk about my current theory on where this book is going. So I think no. I think Christopher Polly is not going to be back in the story because Charlie's never going back to Earth. I think furthermore that Charlie's dad doesn't die. It's just that Charlie never sees him again because Charlie never goes back to Earth. Makes a lot of stuff make sense.
By choice or no?
I don't know. I think maybe something happens magically, meaning he can't go back through the tunnel. I mean, maybe he has to stay in this place to serve some magical destinied role. On the outside, it's possible that he tries to go back and like 100 years have passed. And so it's not that he doesn't go back. It's that he sort of can't go home again because it's not home anymore. But I can't, we've read this book over a number of weeks, so it's possible I'm just missing some detail. Right. But like, it seems to me to explain more things than it obfuscates to say that he just never goes home.
Yeah. I don't think we are aware of anything that specifically contradicts that theory. So sure.
I'll tell you the one thing that made me just absolutely sure that I'm right is it gives us the opportunity for there to be the line where he's like, I guess I would never get to inspect Susie's Fortinbras or something along those lines. I forgot her name because he never gets to go home. Right. Like that, like what was that? That was a setup for a later thing, which will be him like not getting to ever do that, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't know how convinced I am, but I like it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right.
So as we said, Kellen does not believe in any of Charlie's obvious lies, but he can't prove that he's lying. And he also can't harm contestant number 31 because they need as many contestants as possible. They need 32. Hell, he wants 64, but that's just impractical. There's not 64 whole people left in the entire world apparently, but 32, maybe.
We still don't actually know why he wants to do this, other than just sadism.
Fun,
but,
yeah.
Matt,
at this point, how are we feeling about our prison arc? How are you feeling at the end of this chapter?
I'm still having fun with it. I just don't know what to do with it, but I like it. I like the characters. I like the, interplay. I will say there's probably like too many characters for me to keep track of, but that's not the worst problem in the world.
Yeah, and it's okay because Charlie specifically apologizes to us, the reader, for that. So it makes it fine.
Yeah, apology accepted, Charlie.
All right, chapter 1, The Belts. Inaman, not a spotch of gray. Dungeon days. On his way back to the prison, one of the night soldiers leads Charlie by the power generator room just to kind of show him what he could be forced to do here. And we learn that the electricity in the building is created by people running on treadmills, which I'm being a little like sarcastic here, but this is actually just awful, right? This is just terrible.
Yeah. Sucks.
Yeah. And then there's this part, and I wanted to read this and talk to you about this really briefly here. Did the sight of that despair make me as angry as the sight of the slaughtered mermaid? I'm not sure, because it all made me angry. A fair land had been turned foul, and this was the result. Whole people locked in a dungeon, sick people with nooses around their necks forced to run on treadmills to provide electrical lights for the Lord High, and perhaps a few fortunate others, one of whom was almost certainly the man or creature in charge. Flight Killer. I had a really interesting effect when I read this part, Matt, which is I basically went, oh, we were wrong about everything we said last week, right? that maybe Hannah is the good girl, actually. And so I read this part, and I was like, oh no, we're just doing a thing where this was like a pure happy land that was turned foul by this awful thing. Now, of course, none of this actually contradicts anything we said last week, but it was a vibe I was starting to get from the book that it just made me feel like, oh, we're just being like straightforward. Like those people were pure and good. These new people are bad and evil. And that's it. Now, of course, as we both know, that's not exactly the case because we get more information here really, really quickly. But just this was what I was thinking in the moment when I read this part.
Yeah. I feel you. I mean, King doesn't really do the unreliable narrator thing to the extreme that would need to be necessary for our theory to be right. So I funnily enough, I agree with you that this is a strike against our theory, even though there's nothing like explicit. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. We'll see.
We will. When Charlie gets back to his cell, he finds the rest of the men back from playtime. They all look worse for wear and are given a liniment to cure their aches, which, Matt, you immediately go like, huh? What?
Liniment?
Claudia?
Magic?
Huh?
Yeah.
Is Claudia here? Does Claudia work for these guys? I actually think what this is supposed to do, I thought about this for a while because I was like, why are we like directly connecting back to what Claudia did for Radar and for him? This is, I think, a hint that Flight Killer is a member of the Galleon family, actually.
Uh-huh.
That perhaps this is a recipe he as a young man got from her and then just taught these people.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't think of that. I figured it's just magic.
Yeah.
Magic.
Sure. I mean, maybe it's as simple as that, but I don't know. It seemed like Charlie's specific reaction to it was like, oh, that reminds me of Claudia. What are we doing here?
Yeah, you're right.
Charlie continues to get more information from Hamey on the history of the world. Matt, this is some of like the most specific world building we've ever seen in a King novel, right? He does take a lot of time to draw some specifics, not all specifics, but some specifics of what's going on in this world.
Yeah, right. I mean, world building in the sense of having it sort of laid out for us, right?
Yeah.
So
we learn here that the whole ones that we see around here, the 30 men here, and then men and women here, sorry, and then the other ones that exist in the world are actually a bunch of bastards of the Galleon family who Hamey describes as randy. They'd like to fuck, and they made a lot of bastards. And that passes a trait that makes them immune to whatever the gray is. And so all the whole people are immune to the gray because they're bastards of the royal family.
It does clarify for us that the royal family are indeed magic, not just pretend. Yeah.
But this, if you want to read it this way, is a strike for our theory, because these aren't like pure, wonderful fairy tale princes and princesses of yore. These are horny dudes that roamed the land to fuck. Like, that seems very specifically not like Disney fairy tale-esque.
Totally true. I mean, it's more Game of Thrones, if anything.
Yeah.
In fact, doesn't he reference Game of Thrones?
He does. Yes. He specifically references Game of Thrones.
I almost forgot about that, to the extent that I was like, did I make that up? Because it's very Game of Thrones to have, the lords running around the countryside making bastards. That's like the most Game of Thrones thing in the whole Game of Thrones. I think crossed my mind for a second where I'm like, is Charlie? No. But, Yeah.
No, I'm there. We'll get into some of my kookier theories around this in a little bit.
I see. I want you to have some kooky theories. I feel like I'm the one who always comes off as absolutely.
Yeah, I'm gonna give them to you. I'm gonna acknowledge that I'm 99% sure they're wrong, but okay. I'm just being transparent about where my brain went while I was reading these chapters.
Perfect. But yeah, I mean, I think we were sort of right last week in some ways. I don't think I'm grading us on too hard of a curve. Like, I think we were just kind of basically right that, like, people were avoiding talking about, by people I mean the characters in the story were avoiding talking about like the who and why of this coup, because it was committed by one of their own.
Yeah.
And it was the one of their own that happened to be less than perfectly dashing and handsome. And so there's some bad feelings surrounding this. There's even some denial.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to get into there for sure. This is like, I started feeling vindicated again for sure, because I think we even like offhandedly, like, you were kind of convinced that Hannah the Giant was a member of the royal family, and I think I offhandedly was like, or maybe it's Flight Killer. Maybe Flight Killer is actually a Galleon. And then that's literally exactly correct. We learned this week that he was. That he was, as you said, kind of ostracized from the rest of his family by not being pretty and perfect, which is like, huh? Yeah. That's exactly what we were talking about. And so that is the moment where that I was like, oh, we were just right, actually. So that's, but again, I'm still conflicted on ultimately what we're going to be doing with that and saying with that. Like, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, on the idea of Hannah still, like, I'm perhaps being silly, but like the fact that Hannah and Hannah's daughter seem to be immune from the gray in addition to the galleons, it's like, well, they're not royal, but they're more than normal people, right?
Yeah.
So that's not what we said, to be clear, but it does sort of put them in a different bin than everybody else.
Sure. Yeah. So we do learn that Flight Killer, for some reason, like at some point went down into the dark well, we're said, and awoke a god, which you believe is Gog Magog. And that is what essentially caused all of this. I want to talk about that idea of a dark well, Matt, because I did find it interesting that how is Charlie here? Well, he went down a dark well to get here. So I'm wondering if like this is one of those like, you know, wells upon wells upon wells that we just go through worlds. There are many worlds, you know, that we're going through, and this is just like Charlie went through the well to get here. Galleon, or what's Flight Killer's actual name? I can't remember it.
I forgot.
It starts with an E, but I can't remember. Anyway, went down his own well to his own other world and brought something back with him. Yeah,
and are we meant to parallel these characters, right? Like I never quite thought this through, and we haven't met this character, so it's hard to really say definitively, but is this character going to have some intersection with who Charlie is, and Charlie's background to make, you know, a foil or a parallel in some way?
Yeah, character's name was Eldon, by the way. Eldon and
cool.
His ring.
Yeah, exactly.
So this part of the book, Matt, has us learning a bit more about Charlie's fellow prisoners, which I believe will be important later when Charlie either has to like kill them all or help plan a daring prison break, which is that's what's gonna happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
Do you think he's gonna kill any of them?
He might kill the first guy to like show how badass he is. But he might also just like beat him down and then do the I will not kill him thing.
If he says, "Are you not entertained?" I'm just closing the book, I think.
I what's funny is like Charlie references pop culture enough that I would not be that surprised if he like referenced Gladiator at some point in the book that's left.
So I wanted to briefly talk about these prisoners that we've met so far, right? So we've got the comedians Fremy and Stooks. We've got Dami, who has a bad cough. We got Tom, a good singer who sings the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Jaya is one of the women, and she seems very smart, he says. We have Jacka, the Riddler. There's a lot of characters here, Matt. Any of these stand out to you at all?
Nope. But I'm excited to watch them all get murdered by clubs one by one.
It is one of those things where like you can tell King is like doing the quick thing of like defining a character and then giving them like one memorable characteristic. It's like, this is the Riddler, this is the singer, this is the cough, these are the funny ones. It's like he almost acknowledges that you, the reader, are not going to be able to keep all these people straight in your head just naturally, and so here's a thing, here's an archetypal feature of them that you can actually sort and remember them by.
Yeah, there were maybe a couple that stayed in my head beyond I and his cellmate. I mean, here's the thing: is the names I definitely don't remember, but like I do remember that there's also the one woman who like he mucks up his hair, right? Like there's a few specific moments.
But there's two women with them. I can't remember the name of the other one.
I don't either. Yeah. I
mean, there's 30 of these people, Matt. How are we supposed to keep them straight?
I honestly don't think we're meant to, like you said.
Yeah. We also learned, Matt, that Hannah is not a galleon. Sorry. Once again, just completely wrong there, Matt. Embarrassing, to be honest with you. But she is just a giant that came down from the north. We don't know why. Does she work for Flight Killer? Don't know. I guess so. He gave her a giant throne and had her watch fail at watching the sundial. So, but she does have a daughter named Red Molly, who is not a giant the size of Hannah, but also is pretty big. And here the prisoners believe that if they don't get 32 contestants soon, Flight Killer will just get bored and insist on her being the 32nd contestant, or they kind of also feel that the winner of this contest would have to face Red Molly anyway. What do you think we're doing with these characters at all? Anything beyond what you've already mentioned?
Well, I don't know about beyond what I've already mentioned. I mean, it still bothers me. It doesn't seem like a very Stephen King thing to have like a big gross monster and then have it just be like she's evil because she's ugly. And also, Eldon, he's ugly and therefore he's evil. And her daughter, evil and ugly. Everyone who is ugly is evil, and everyone who is beautiful and pretty is good. And that is the way this story works. Mm-hmm. That just is weird, but it's entirely possible that it's like, it's a fairy tale. Like you can almost imagine him listening to this podcast, which he would never do, and be like, it's a fairy tale. I keep telling you, every single thing in the story is emphasizing that it's a fairy tale.
Yeah.
Of course it works that way. Why are you being so weird about it? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm prepared to be weird. I'm prepared to be wrong about this.
However, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah. No. I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and say I think the Galleon family is evil and Eldon was correct for what he did, but I don't think the lesson of this book is going to be as simple as ugly, bad, pretty, good. Like I just don't think that's what we're doing here.
Is this time for your crazy theories yet? Or
no,
okay,
not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. I want to talk about this though. This actually gets into our crazy theories, or it's a prelude to my crazy theory. So, they're talking about candlesticks, I think, and Charlie says, "I spoke without thinking. Here comes a candle to light your bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head." Silence. Then I said, "High gods, where did you ever learn that?" "I don't know. I think my mother used to say it to me when I was small." So, Matt, this is a line from a nursery rhyme that was popular in the early 20th century and before. It also, if you recognize it, it was in the book 1984. It was in there. The nursery rhyme is, like a lot of other nursery rhymes, weird, and this one is about an execution. So essentially, like the part here is that like when someone comes to a bedside with a candle, it's the priest giving the last rites for the condemned, and then the next morning, here comes the chopper to chop off your head. Like that's what we're doing here. Nursery rhymes are weird, man. I didn't know what to do with this other than this is kind of a weird thing for you. This is like a weird nursery rhyme for your mom.
Yeah.
Like at least Ring Around the Rosie is not like, and then you all died. Right.
Yeah. It's pretty dark. I guess the one thing that I don't have a formulated, conspiracy theory about this. I actually think it's unlikely that his mom was anything magical or special, but the idea that she is a little off. We got a couple notes along those lines, right? Like that she.
Yep.
This is a woman who tells her son nursery rhymes that no one in the 20th, 21st century remembers. And also he happens to be royal. Just saying. Yep.
Here we go. We're here, man.
Here we go.
This is it.
All right. Well, go for it.
This is what I've been leading up to.
Okay.
There's some crazy shit going on with his mom, dude.
Okay.
Okay. So again, I don't think this is correct. I don't think this is correct, but this is what occurred to me. I think it's this beat, and then we get several other beats of him specifically referencing his things his mom said to him, that make me think like we're not just having him think about his mom.
Mm-hmm.
It's something more than that. And I am not ready to be like, oh, his mom is actually from Empis, and that's the secret. She came from Empis, and that's why she died, because someone is like it's Peterkin who escaped, and he was the one driving the truck that ran her over while she was eating her chicken. No, I do think it would be interesting to talk about like what was the event that set this whole thing into motion, because one of the things that we are basically told is true here is that Eldon perhaps himself did not cause the collapse of the monarchy and the purge of the monarchy, but that in those moments, he, to escape that, stumbled upon the well and was met by a great god down the well that he woke up and then used to get his revenge on all his mean family. So it got me thinking, is like, okay, well, was there something that occurred in this world that like threw the world into chaos? And it's like, well, what if this lady died in our world and has this deep connection to this world, and that threw things into chaos? Something happened because of her death. I went nuts with this, Matt. And it's off of like the smallest kernels of info, which is like, my mom was a little weird and said weird things to me sometime, which is basically like all we have is just little bits and pieces of like, yeah, my mom used to say that to me all the time. And yeah, I guess that's weird. And then I think literally the other one was like, my mom took Latin.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, interesting. You start talking about your mom a lot, Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so the only other thing that comes to my mind, which is the way my mind works, just as compelling as these things, is that we learn about the event of her death and the fact that like she had her little Red Riding Hood hood, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's like, at the time, it was like, well, we're reading a book called Fairy Tale, so totally unsurprising that there would be a fairy tale element popping up here.
Mm-hmm.
But then we read another few hundred pages of book, and it's like, no, the book doesn't just like willy-nilly sprinkle in fairy tale concepts. All the fairy tale concepts are centered around Empus and located inside Empus.
Yeah.
So what that does now in retrospect is it marks her out specifically as being associated with fairy tale concepts, and potentially with Empus, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're going crazy with this one, Matt. I want to say, for the record, I don't think this is the case. However, if it ends up being the case, I will certainly take every bit of credit for correctly predicting it. So
yeah.
I get to play both sides. If it's wrong, I get to say, well, I told you it was wrong. But if it's right, I get to say, well, I knew it.
Yeah, I mean, so okay, just to say what is actually the most actually compelling piece of evidence is that if he is indeed Prince Charlie, then how is he Prince Charlie unless one of his parents was a royal?
Yeah, right? I mean, yes, there's also a perfectly plausible explanation that like the world is just transforming him into what the world needs, and it perhaps did the same thing to Bowditch, only Bowditch rejected that call. We don't know, but I don't know.
It's possible. It's possible.
All right. So as our chapter comes to an end, speaking of this, Hamey points out something that Charlie hadn't noticed. His hair is mud-caked and dirty, but if you were to wash a little of that mud off, what would you see now? A fully blonde boy. The transformation that was only hinted at last week seems to be in full force now, and the result of this is that Hamey now thinks that Charlie is indeed the prince, right? And Charlie denies it, but then we get this thing that ends the chapter. I looked back at me smiling. Who died and made you god? Cease, I said. Why would you tease someone who's your fellow in this vile place? That didn't sound like Charlie Reed at all. That kid was a lot more apt to say, quit fucking around, man. Quit fucking around than what had just come out of my mouth. Yet it was me, and Iota's smile was replaced by a look of puzzled speculation. Ugh. So he both is and isn't this person.
And he's aware of it. Like, that's one fun thing about this transformation is he's every time he does this, it's like he's watching himself third person being like, that was weird. Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
The audiobook reader also does kind of a fun thing where he makes Charlie sound all princely. Kind of reminded me of the way Peter from Eyes of the Dragon would behave sometimes.
Oh, that's fun. I like that. Chapter 22, The Playing Field, Amit, Washing Up, Cake, The Gas Jets. Matt, it's finally time for playtime as the prisoners, this time Charlie included, are led out of the prison and onto what is essentially a locker room and eventually a playing field for some very popular sport, I guess I do love the dichotomy of this dirty, dank prison and this incredibly well-maintained field and equipment. Like, basically, it's just the NCAA is what we got going on here.
It's actually kind of surreal, the juxtaposition. I'm going to return to my perspective on like what kind of tone or even perhaps genre space is King aiming for in this part of the story. Because earlier I kind of felt like it was a retro horror vibe, almost reminded me of like a Goosebumps novel in a good way. And this week's reading cemented in a more general sense that we're doing like a young adult thing, which we knew already kind of, but like, here's what I mean by that. All the most popular young adult books all have contests or tournaments, Hunger Games, Quidditch and the Goblet of Fire and Harry Potter, maze running, I assume.
Haven't seen that one, huh?
No, I haven't. Could you tell? I can think of like 5,000 animes that also center on tournaments and contests and so forth.
Yeah, but of course the bylaws say we're not allowed to ever talk about anime on the show.
That's true. And also that's not a quite young adult. But the point is, like, there being a big elimination tournament was not something I saw coming, but it makes a lot of sense when you view this novel in light of like King is trying to write YA horror.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. But like, that wasn't this book up until this point. Or maybe it was, and we just weren't picking up on it. Like, maybe we'll go back and read this book one day and see all the specific elements that are gesturing towards, oh, this is him just trying to do the YA thing. I think it's more fun to think of like, perhaps this is him trying to take what is YA now and what was fairy stories essentially was what like child stories then, and like merge them together into something different and new. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Or like find some kind of through line between like, look, we're all humans. We all kind of are interested in the same types of stories. Is there a secret structure behind the Hunger Games and Hansel and Gretel where it's like, well, this is the kind of this is the thread. That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah. There is an interesting thing worth talking about here, though, as Charlie kind of looks around. He gets the idea that this part of the city, this arena, this sports building, was not a place meant for the rich. This was a place built for the common folk. And when he sees the array of essentially like aristocrats, one of whom is this woman Petra, who we still don't know, but there she is. They are essentially in like the royal booths of the building. It feels wrong to him. It feels like something has gone wrong here. Like I think he says specifically, this place wasn't built for the likes of those assholes. I thought, I don't know how I can know that, but I do. And that's like, once again, this idea of the structure of this entire place is wrong. And the people have been denied something.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do with that. But it's
there. Yeah, I think we're setting up something that we don't know what it is yet.
Yeah. There's also this moment here where we, I think, start to lean towards making I not an antagonist, but a sympathetic character here, because Charlie is looking at Hamey and how he's struggling to run. And he says, I don't see how, I mean, once the fair one starts, assuming it ever does, how can they expect him to, fight? They don't, I said, and I detected a strange note in his voice. It could have been sympathy. Or maybe I mean fellow feeling. It wasn't that he liked Hamey. It was just that he liked the situation we were in less. I love this, Matt. This is like the slow roll of that, exactly what you talked about, that trope of the big gruff asshole that eventually becomes your second in command. Like, this is the first little crack in him. We see like, oh no, he hates this actually. And he hates this more than he hates you.
Yeah, right. He's not a bad guy. He's just in a horrible situation. It's very easy for you to change your opinion on this kind of character because, like their perspective is understandable.
Yep.
So.
Yep. As they run around the track for warm-ups, Charlie begins counting people and realizes that there are only 19 soldiers in the, and he estimates that that's all of them. I think Kellen goes to 20, but but he says 19, and that's our number, so we have to say it here. I love this map because you can tell he's already starting to plan. He's already starting to be like, we actually outnumber the guards then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never more than 12.
never more than 12. Never more than 19 in this case. If you don't understand that reference, then watch the entirety of the television show Andor, the best Star Wars product of all time.
Can I tell you, after I finished reading this chapter, I did not watch the entire prison sequence in Andor, but I just booted up the never more than 12 scene and watched it because
such a good scene.
So good.
I've watched that one YouTube clip like 10 times.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Next, the team tosses some balls around before going on another run. On this run, Charlie is pushed over by another prisoner named Amit, just, for no reason other than he felt like it. Charlie immediately goes, "Oh, I gotta teach this guy a lesson." And he gets the opportunity for that at the very end of practice when they get to fight each other with sticks. And I guess the people observing noticed that Charlie and this guy had a little bit of a problem with each other because it matches them together for sparring, and they fight. And Matt, how do we talk about this? And I was angry, very angry. The way I'd been at Christopher Polly when I broke one of his hands, beat him up, and then broke the other one. The way I'd been angry at my father when he retreated into booze after my mother died. I left him alone, didn't complain about Dad's drinking much, but I expressed that anger in other ways. Some I've told you, some I've too ashamed to tell. So he's angry, and he takes out all this angry on Amit. He beats him up, and when he cries uncle, he keeps going. I love the line, there wasn't no great mystery here. I just wanted to fuck the dude up.
Yeah.
So how are we supposed to feel about this, Matt? How this is the continuation of the thing we've been talking about the whole time, with the Charlie being very interested in telling us how shitty of a person he is. Once again, we have this. Are we meant to be worried about Charlie?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a darkness in him, and now that it's occurred to me that there's perhaps a foil in the form of Eldon. As just like, the other prince, the dark mirror, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
I realized like, well, a person can come from a bad spot and they have a choice in how they react to it. And Charlie had a lot of anger in him, but he has tried to distance himself from that and live it down. He's constantly telling us about how he did all these horrible things that he hasn't actually told us yet. Once again, by the way, I'm going to keep harping on this sort of, I don't think at this point, I don't think I'm just being paranoid. I think I'm just right that like there's something worse that he hasn't told us yet. Maybe he will, maybe he won't tell us. But the point is like, he has this darkness and we are meant to worry about that darkness.
Yeah.
Once again, for the 7th time, he's telling us like, I haven't even told you all the bad stuff I did. And that's including telling you about the bomb threat. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I don't think he's ever going to tell us that stuff, but yeah, there's something there. Yeah. And I do think like we reasoned next week, like this is going to come to matter in some key way.
Yeah.
Back in the locker room, though, it seems that word about Charlie has gotten around, and even Amit now believes that he is the prince. I has him wash his hair so all the prisoners can see it in its full glory. He's tall, he's blonde-haired, he's blue-eyed, he's just like all those Disney princes. By the way, I looked this up. I looked it up because I was curious.
Uh-huh.
The only Disney prince in the entire Disney princesses line of films that has blonde hair is, as you said last week, John Smith from Pocahontas. That's it.
Uh-huh. That makes me so happy to have gotten that right, first of all. And it's just funny. It's just funny because we have this conception of Prince of the Disney prince being a certain way. And it's like, what is that based in?
Plenty of blonde-haired, blue-eyed princesses. But yeah, on the prince side, they're almost always dark-haired, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is really fun to think about where this perception came from, because it's not like we're sitting here saying, actually, Steven, you were just wrong. It's like I was totally on board with that perception until I actually like spent a minute and looked it up, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, no. This
Yeah,
assumption, where does it come from?
Yeah, I don't actually know. Like, is this part? Is this a part of other fairy tales that we've heard where it's like, I don't think so, right? I don't remember Jack and the Beanstalk being described as blonde haired and blue eyed. I don't remember him being described physically at all. But nonetheless, we have this cache thought. I don't know.
It's very interesting. Still can't believe you got that right, though.
Well, I got 2 daughters, man.
Honestly, if I'm being honest with myself, the only princesses that have blonde hair are like Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella, like the 2 OG ones. And then that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think Rapunzel.
I guess Rapunzel does.
Rapunzel's very recent.
Although, like, wasn't there a whole thing in Tangled how her hair turns not blonde by the end of that movie?
That's true. She's a short-haired brunette by the end of that movie.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is her real hair color, of course.
Yeah, it was only blonde because it was magic. Just like Charlie's.
Just like Charlie's.
He's male Rapunzel.
His mom is Rapunzel.
There we go. We solved it.
Yep.
So everyone sees him with his blonde hair. His eyes are not blue yet, but they're getting there. And they all kneel before their prince. And he says, "Get up. I'm not sure who you think I am. Or I'm not who you think I am." And then I love the line following this. "Only I wasn't sure that was true." Like, Charlie is now beginning to believe it as well. Like, it's hard not to, right? When you look in the mirror and see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy staring back at you. You're changing into something. You're talking different. Like when Amit comes and apologizes to him, he doesn't say "no problem." He says, "I accept gladly. Take your feet." Yeah. Like he's filling the role. And this is kind of scary in that seemingly outside of his control, he's filling the role, right? It's like, it's not even that his physical features are changing to match this idea of the prince, but like when he says X, his body actually states Y, and he has no control over that. Like, it's kind of frightening.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of magic, right? There's one thing lingering in the back of everything is like there's clearly sort of a bright fairy tale magic, and then there's clearly also sort of a dark Lovecraftian magic, like everything having to do with Gog Magog.
Yeah,
is I think very Lovecraft, right? And that's not what this feels like. This feels like Disney.
Yeah.
And both of these magical vibes are operating in the same world.
Yeah. Which I think supports this idea that perhaps he's trying to bring these disparate types of fae stories together under some central banner of fairy tale.
Yeah. To be overly literal for a second, perhaps it's just that like Empis is organically Disney and the deep well is Lovecraft, and by opening the deep well, that has infected this world.
I like it a lot. Yeah,
cool.
So they get back to the cells, and chocolate cake is awarded for those who were able to hit a tackle dummy hard enough. Charlie, unfortunately, was not one of these, but that doesn't matter because Amit gives him some cake anyway. And when Percy comes to deliver the cake to him, he kneels too. This is so satisfying. This is so satisfying when that happens. You're like you can tell the plan, the prison break.
Yeah.
You can see it.
Yeah. You can see the plan beginning to form in Charlie's mind.
So Charlie, at the end of the chapter, chats with Hamey, who is looking worse and worse every day. As he's chatting about Flight Killer and this Fair One contest, he's trying to understand who is what and where everything goes. And he makes the mistake of mentioning the name out loud of Gog Magog. And I love this because it says something heard. The gas jets, which had been guttering along at the usual and casting only the dimmest lights, suddenly shot up into bright blue arrows that turned deep malign, flashbulb bright. There were cries of fear and surprise from some cells. I saw Iota at his barred door, one hand shading his eyes. It only lasted for a second or two, but I felt the stone floor beneath me rise and then thud back. Rock dust sifted down from the ceiling. The walls groaned. It was as if our prison had cried out at the sound of that name. No, not as if. It did cry out.
That was so cool.
Isn't it so awesome? Like, it's terrifying that the power of this thing is even uttering its name causes real visceral reaction in the world. But it's so great.
It's great. And we have this idea that if you say his name, you speed his waking. So there's a ticking clock element here where it's like, eventually he's going to wake, whatever this is. And, can we stop that from happening? Like that strikes me as the real stakes of the story. Like Flight Killer is sort of the sub boss, and trying to deal with this Gog Magog problem sounds like a more central issue.
Yeah, but how are you going to do that? How do you defeat a God Magog? I
think at best you just seal it away, and even that just, you buy time, right? You plug the well, and you hope that was enough.
Yeah.
There's also a possibility that this is like the Gog Magog just gets out, and Empus is completely overrun with Lovecraftian nightmares, and Charlie is writing this story from Earth where he is just like plugged up the well as well as he can, and it's just like a very dark ending where it's like, don't say his name lest you speed his waking, because now he's only one level down.
Yeah, could be. I like that. All right, our final chapter of the week, chapter 23, titled Tempus Est Umbra and Mente, Hazy History, Claw, A Note, Seedings. Our chapter starts with Charlie telling us the story about a time he took Latin in high school, a decision primarily based on the fact that his mother took Latin in high school from the same woman who was teaching it today, and so he just wanted that little connection with him. This is, I jokingly made this as part of my grand there's something going on with his mom that we don't know theory. I still think that's fun, but the other part of this I wanted to talk to you about is I couldn't remember if we specifically talked about this, but like this thing happened to Charlie, right? His mother died tragically, horrifically. And then his father couldn't take it, and his father became an alcoholic. And Charlie went from mourning his mother to having to deal with his father and having to take care of himself. And he's never, I think, really completely processed that his mom died. Like, I think the reason that I thought about this is because I do feel like in the most recent chapters, we're getting little bits and pieces of who his mom was more than we ever have in the story up until this point. Like, we got the story of her death, but I went back and read some of that, and the way, in retrospect, the way he tells the story of his mother's death felt less like, let me tell you this really sad thing and talk to you about how I feel about it, and more like a very clinical, this is what happened, and then like kind of very blasé, like, yeah, sucks, doesn't it? To the point where I was like, oh, this kid just hasn't actually processed this at all. And he didn't get the opportunity to process it because then his father was dealing with all his shit, and like there was all the stress and uncertainty of that. And then his father got better. But then like there's just no time to ever like actually work through the emotional implications of losing your mother. And I mean, we're about to see in the next chapter, in this chapter, he has this dream with Leia, who Leia is basically holding his mother's old hairdryer and becoming kind of like a surrogate mother for him. And I just really do think that like part of this story is perhaps like if we step back and want to like do like a overarching metaphor of the story, what if this is just the story of how Charlie processes the death of his mother?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the idea that he has this anger within him.
Yeah.
That is, that becomes a lot less mysterious if you view it in light of just like, well, yeah, he never got past that. He never understood the implications of that. He has this deep well of anger. And And the way that I've pointed out probably too often is like his coping mechanism for that anger is just to kind of like cram it down, and he ends up with this very kind of moralizing stance toward his own behavior, which is not, he's not an integrated person.
Yeah.
I just think you're spot on here.
And the anger is such a good point, because when he mentions the anger, when he beats up Amit and he talks about the anger he felt toward Christopher Polly, then he says, just like the anger I felt toward my father when he was drinking. What he doesn't say is the anger I felt towards the world for taking my mother away, or even perhaps completely irrationally, the anger I felt towards my mother for dying, right? These are normal emotions that people have in grief like this, and he doesn't say any of that. And it feels like we are, I think ultimately this is the thing we are doing, whether his mother has anything to do with Empis at all, ultimately doesn't matter. But I think we are doing something with this specifically.
I agree. I think that the Kingian refrain of the goddamn bridge was something that always stood out to me as like, yeah, sometimes he just has a thing that the character says, and that's, whatever. But it's like, well, think about that. It's like he's angry at the bridge. Like that's not rational either. But what it is it's a implication of anger toward something. It doesn't make sense. It's it's misdirected anger, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm excited. This is one thing that I'm really excited to see exactly how this plays out.
Me too.
So, but the actual like plot reason for this whole story about Latin and his mother is Charlie learned a phrase that day in class that applies to his current situation. That's the one that was in the title, Tempus Fugit, or not Tempus Fugit, Tempus est umbra in mente, which is just time is a shadow in the mind. Essentially, like you perceive time internally, right? Time is a face on the water. Wait, no, that's a different one.
That's a different book. Yeah.
Charlie is now nice enough here at the beginning of this chapter, Matt, to reconstruct the basic history of Empis for us from what he's pieced together from all the prisoners. And it's surprisingly a little bit more complex than you figured a fairy tale would have. Like, it's a story not of this great, powerful monarchy being laid low by a deep, dark evil. It's a story of a great, powerful monarchy slowly losing power as society transitions more towards a democratic representative republic, right? Which is just not something you would expect to happen in a story like this.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, actually. I found myself thinking a little bit about Midworld and the good man, but things didn't quite go that way. It seems like things just went the same way they went in England, literally. I think, one thing I take away from this is like the people in this world are just people. Like there's magic, there's giants, there's wolfies, but the people are just people, and they, so they're going to do really kind of mundane stuff, like want to have a representative government.
Damn those people.
Yeah.
Even in fairy tales, they want to be represented.
Right. Even if you live in a world where some watery tart really did present a sword to, the king, you're still gonna insist on representation in the legislature. I mean, that's just on.
It's really disappointing. Get over yourself, people.
Yeah.
The pivotal information in this history lesson we learned, though, Matt, is something we've already talked about, that Eldon, Flight Killer, was ugly. Ugly. How dare he be ugly?
Yeah. It's messed up, man.
Yeah. How dare he?
It's gross.
So yeah, we learned that he's ugly. I think basically the story doesn't explicitly tell this, and it seems to be some people in the world that are unconvinced or think it's differently, but like whether the gray was here when Eldon became Flight Killer, or whether Eldon becoming Flight Killer released the gray curse on everyone. Charlie is pretty convinced it was the latter, that he released the curse. He also slaughtered all the butterflies, which is why he's called Flight Killer. I think we basically got that right? We guessed. I think we went more metaphorical with it, that like he killed the monarchy and the monarchy was represented by butterflies. So like he killed that, but essentially we learned that he just killed all the literally just killed all the butterflies.
Yeah. We were close.
Yeah. I really liked this though. Eldon was jealous of his brother, and jealousy grew into hatred. All of them seem to agree on this point, and why not? It was a classic story of sibling rivalry that would have been home in any fairy tale. I knew good stories are not always true stories, or not completely true, but this one was plausible enough, human nature being what it was. And I just read that sentence, Matt, and go, oh, there's definitely more to this, right? It's like, yeah, everyone just kind of agrees this is how it happened, and it makes sense because like this is how fairy tales work. And yeah, you know, the ugly guy was ostracized for being ugly, and he got jealous and mean about it, and so he decided that turned to hatred, and then he decided to like, you know, this is how all those stories go. It's definitely that, right? It's, yeah, it's definitely just that.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the way it's laid out there does feel pretty pat. So
yeah,
it makes us skeptical.
Mm-hmm. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like he's literally saying, yeah, this is that. Yeah. Everyone. This is what it is.
This is one of those. This is a world of fairy tales that runs on fairy tale rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he killed all the butterflies, which is awful, and I hate him. I hate him for that. How dare you?
They came back somehow.
They did come back, and Charlie knows that. No one else knows that. Not all the butterflies are gone. They still have magic in them. So it's not too late. I guess that's what we're saying.
Yeah.
So time goes by now. We kind of just pass through time here, and I want to talk to you about this, Matt. Like, let's revisit this idea that I think we talked about the first time Charlie got to Empus. Do we think time here is moving at the same speed as it is back in our world? Like, Charlie's been here for weeks now, maybe. Is everyone at home in the real world like looking for him, presuming he's missing, or is in your mind, I know you don't believe he's going to actually get back, but if he got back, would this be a I left 2 minutes ago thing?
Yeah, I feel like if he does get back, it'll probably be a him calling his dad and being like, oh, I'm sorry, how long have I been gone? And his dad being like, what's wrong, Charlie? I'm still at but that doesn't really work because, okay, specifically his dad has to be dead for that to, anyway. Yeah, there's too many branching decision trees in my head here, honestly.
Sure.
But you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. All right, so finally the 30-second challenger arrives, Matt. He's a big brute of a man named Claw. What a name. That is.
Yeah, so I just want to riff on that for a second. Like, speaking of this being like a by the numbers trope world that runs on tropes and fairy tale logic, like the big bad guy arrives and his name is Claw and he's like supernaturally dangerous. So it's like, once again, we're sort of faced with this question of like, do we just take this at face value, or are we going to subvert this in some way?
Yeah. Who knows? I don't know. Who knows? Yeah, what Claw is, as you said, like kind of fits that perfect trope of a person, right? He doesn't give a shit about anyone. He only cares about himself. He doesn't seem to care that Charlie's Prince Charming. Prince Charling. Prince Charling. And we see that he immediately takes down Iota, who's like the biggest one of them, pretty easily. So yeah, like you're absolutely right. This fits the archetype. It fits the trope so perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe this will be like if King handles this just like you would expect him to. Maybe this is a symbol or a sign to us that we need to stop it with all these insane theories.
But we're not going to.
So that night, Charlie dreams again, Matt, but this time it's not of Radar, but of Leia. Leia with a mouth and some cute dimples on her. And Leia also holding a purple hairdryer that belonged to Charlie's mother. Let's just state once again that this is not a dream. This is Leia talking to him, right?
Yeah.
This is just Leia talking to him, which is fun because, like, essentially, I think what she's saying is like, hey, we know you're in there. Radar got to us. What I'm presuming is they're all getting together, right? I think when the prison break happens, he's going to get outside the city. He's going to find Claudia. He's going to find Woody. He's going to find Leia and Radar and maybe even Dora. I think the team's going to get together is my guess on this.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're going to have prepared. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's communicating, hang on, hold on. I think what she says to him is you're faster than you think. Which I think is going to play in how he escapes somehow. Because that is an interesting beat of Charlie, like being in ridiculously good shape. Like we didn't talk about this when everything they were doing in practice, Charlie's like very easily doing. And like they're running around the track and he's not tired at all. Everyone else is huffing and puffing except for like maybe Iota. He's definitely like fast and strong and incredibly in good shape, and he's always kind of downplaying that.
Yeah, no, he's comparing himself to like he's comparing himself to smaller people and then being like, well, they're faster than me, and it's like, yeah, but that's literally just because you're large and thus stronger and also fast, just not as fast as those other athletes who play high school sports that you're comparing yourself against.
So Charlie wakes up from the dream, and Percy is coming by to give him some leftover food, which is crazy that would happen. But it's not just leftover food, Matt, because there's a hidden note inside that says Percy is going to help them escape. There's a way out from the official's room. It is dangerous, but he is there to serve him. Percival, not Percy. Percival.
Yeah. It's going to be really sad when Percival dies.
Oh, he's almost certainly going to die. Yeah.
Glad we agree.
So at last, Matt, the fair one is ready to begin now that they've got 32 challengers. The seeding is passed out, and of course, Charlie versus Claw is the main event of the night. It's kind of wild here at the end of the chapter, Matt, where I think we're about to get into the tournament itself. Like, I think that's going to be the next sequence we read right after this one. We still don't know what this competition actually is. I mean, presumably it's a one-on-one fight to the death for each of these contestants, right? But like how? Are you just gonna like go into the middle of the arena with the sticks and just hit each other with sticks and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, they'll probably give them more deadly weapons, is my guess. But you're right. Like, we don't know what this looks like, really. We just don't know.
Yeah. I like it's called the fair one too. We haven't talked about that name.
Yeah, the only connection I have there is the idea of like the fairest one of all and the Snow White, right?
Yeah.
But
so maybe it's just a beauty competition.
Elimination beauty tournament, yeah.
I don't know. I think our Charlie would fare pretty good in that one.
That's a good point. He just washes his hair.
All right, but that is, Matt, the end of this week's reading. Next week, we will have our penultimate episode, which will be chapters 24 through 28 of Fairy Tale. I think we're going to get that first round. I think we're going to get a prison break, and then we'll see what happens after that. Any predictions that you have outside of what we've already said?
A lot of these prisoners are going to still die in the escape. And I do. No, I'm not going to make any more predictions.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think Hamy's going to die?
Definitely.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think the prison break is going to happen before or after or during this first round of combat?
After.
So do you think that means there's going to be 16 prisoners escaping because half of them will be dead?
Gosh. See, this is my thought. It's something I was thinking about earlier. Like, is this the story where is it tonally speaking? Is this a story where we're going to watch 16 people get brutally murdered in front of our eyes? So far, it doesn't feel that dark. But then again, there is a lot of darkness around the edges of the story, and we could totally go there. So
yeah, I
was going to say no, but maybe.
All right. I appreciate that extremely non-committal answer.
Yeah, thank you.
But we will find out next week as we move into our penultimate episode. I can't believe it's already almost here, Matt. Wow.
Me either.
Before we go, let's discussion question time, Matt. We asked a fun question this week. What was it?
What's the creepiest city that you know of, that you've been to?
Yeah.
Darth Fuel says, my favorite creepy city, Silent Hill, has already been named. So I'm going with my second favorite one. It's actually a part of a city, the Cognuza Ward from the Flying City of Aor, dreamed up by the D&D Dungeon Master Matt Mercer from Critical Role. Cognuza, just like Impus, wasn't always creepy. During the height of mortal civilization, mages came together and built flying cities. One of them was Aor. The mages of Aor had even bigger ambitions and in secret built a weapon that could kill gods. The gods learned about that plan and decided to smite the city with a weapon out of the sky. During the attack of the gods, a part of the city teleported into another plane of existence, the Astral Sea. In this place, the Cognuza Ward slowly started to transform itself into an eldritch horror. Buildings in the city appear to be a strange combination of stonework and flesh, with veins, teeth, and bulging flesh occasionally appearing as parts of archways and streets. Buildings' interiors contain elements of moving living tissue as well, though some retain more stone and metal structures. The streets and roads seem to pulse like veins. The broken up floating land masses of the ward are held together by sinew-like tendrils. Not only the ward changed, but its people too. It destroyed and merged their minds of all the people that lived there, and then shattered their psyches to slowly reform over time. Pure nightmare fuel. Love it.
No, it's definitely creepy, that city.
Have you ever listened to the Critical Roles?
I have not listened to a minute of Critical Role, no.
Me neither.
I do probably like it. I just don't. I mean, I don't listen to any of those type of podcasts anymore.
Yeah, me neither. The problem was I got way too into the ones that I did listen to and like obsessive about them, and was like, I need to be careful with this. This is a powerful magic, and I didn't listen to any new ones.
All right, next we have Busy Dad 82, who says, I would normally go Lovecraftian or Kingian with the creepy city trope, but instead I'm going with the childhood trauma that is the nightmarish 1985 movie Return to Oz. Dorothy, after escaping shock therapy at the sanitarium, finds herself on what's left of the yellow brick road leading to the ruins of the Emerald City. Anyone who saw this movie at an impressionable age remembers the figure frozen in stone, the Wheelers, and the headless Princess Mombi and her collection of living, staring, detachable heads. Jesus.
Dear God.
I've never seen this.
I've never even heard of this.
I kind of want to now.
Yeah, I'm super interested. I have no idea what this is. Awesome.
Busy Dad also says, and at the risk of another baseball curse as we head into the series against the Dodgers, go Padres. I only bring this up because we are recording this on Wednesday night, and the New York Mets, my baseball team, have just defeated the Philadelphia Phillies and advanced to the National League Championship Series. So I'm very happy about that. The Padres are doing pretty good. They're tied with the Dodgers at 2 games apiece, so they'll have a deciding game in a couple days, and then my team will play the winner of that series. So, oh my gosh,
sweet.
We could be enemies, Busy Dad.
Well, good luck to both of you equally. C. Thomas Howell ATSM says, favorite creepy city? Does Lud count? I find Lud to be creepy, terrifying, and fascinating. What was it like before the pubes and grays started their wars? What must it be like to walk down the streets with loads of dead bodies hanging from poles, waiting in terror for the god drums to start?
Lud is a great answer, of course. Always.
Yeah. Velcro fly.
Apocalypse Win says, I'm a sucker for any story about an outsider arriving in a small, preferably coastal town where the inhabitants all seem friendly on the surface, but things are just a bit off. Notable examples include Dead and Buried, The Stepford Wives, and Let's Scare Jessica to Death. But my absolutely favorite creepy city has to be Summers Isle from the original Wicker Man. A police officer from the mainland arrives in a small Scottish island to investigate the disappearance of a younger girl. The locals are less than helpful and have some unique views on sexuality that clash with the prudish officer's ideals. On the surface, the community actually seems lovely, but there's a sinister undercurrent to all the proceedings right up until the unforgettable climax. It's a movie that makes me laugh and huddle in fear, sometimes at the same time. I've not seen the original Wicker Man, but of course I definitely have to seen the Nicolas Cage remake with the bees.
I would like to see this. I mean, creepy, obviously, but
yeah, we need to do like another Doofcast series on blind spots, but it's like horror blind spots because you have a lot of those because you're a fraidy cat.
I do. I mean, which makes me hesitate to agree to your idea, but
well, we would obviously decide on the lineup beforehand so you wouldn't get too spookied.
That's reasonable. All right. Apocalypse Win 7 says, I'm a sucker for any story about an outsider arriving in a
just read that one.
But what's happening?
Oh, it's my fault. It's my fault.
Your fault. It's your fault.
I skipped my boy Blissorb.
It's your fault. For once. For once, it's your fault. Blissorb says, Gotham City, where the nights are long and the days aren't pleasant, there lurk villains such as Joker, Killer Croc, Man-Bat, Two-Face, and so on and so forth. In this rainy dystopian city, there's nothing you can personally do against those villains other than hope the Batman hears your cries for help. As you either are either strapped to a chair in an apartment building rigged with explosives, or poison ivy has control over your mind. There's only one man that chooses justice in the city that is a damn terrible place.
Man-Bat is my favorite villain because someone was just like, what if it's Batman? But the opposite.
Yeah.
It's Man-Bat.
My recollection is that Man-Bat in the animated series is the scariest thing in the entire history.
Yeah. 100%. It's awful. Man-Bat.
Love Man-Bat.
All right, Magi24 says, since we are already in the creepy season, my entry for this week's question is actually Abandoned Village of Dudleytown, Connecticut. It was never a successful settlement, and it is currently privately owned and closed to visitors. It has been home to the Dudley family in the 18th century, as well as some others. Some rumors have it that it is haunted, while others tell of an ancestor of the Dudley family who has been cursed. Had I known, I would have submitted that last week, too. And the curse was carried down to the settlement. The curse caused attempts to farm land to fail, and supposedly also was the cause of mental illness in the family. If that wasn't enough, it is located in a valley named the Dark Entry Forest. The name comes from the shadows that are cast by some nearby mountains, as opposed to any supernatural reasons. But also, come on, it's because of supernatural reasons.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this is one of those places where there's a natural methane seep somewhere in this valley, which is the reason for most haunted houses.
Why do you gotta ruin everything, Matt?
Yeah, sorry. No, it's cool though. I mean, I would love to go to a place that has a natural methane seep that I'm unaware of, so that I can experience having hallucinations and night terrors and yeah, it would be awesome. Anyway,
cool.
Okay. OG Energy Vampire says, my favorite creepy city is one from the book that you covered on a previous book club, Piranesi. The shifting rooms, the maze of towers, coupled with the unreliable narrator and memory loss. Plus, I really like the writing. I really love the book, and I recommend it to anybody who is looking for a good mystery box book. That was one of my favorite books from the entire 70 book long book club that we've done.
It's a very, very good book. Very creepy city. Very good answer.
Yeah.
Darian Tiro says, is there anything more iconic creepy city than Silent Hill? The fog, the air raid sirens, the horrible mutations wandering around the city. It all comes together as one of the most atmospheric horror games ever made. Unpopular opinion, but I feel like the 2006 film did a pretty solid job of depicting the atmosphere that made the first game so great. I'm not going to call it the best video game adaptation of all time, but I'm going to make a stand and say it's not as bad as people say it is. Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. Silent Hill is one of those movies that our friend Michael randomly really, really likes.
Yeah, I think so. I like it too. I think it's good. I never played the... Yeah.
I like the movie. Yeah.
I never played the game, but I agree that the movie is super creepy. I mean, that does, whether or not it lives up to the game, it's a very, very creepy movie. And it's great. Duran Longbeard says, my favorite creepy city is the titular village in Resident Evil 8, The Village. You get unceremoniously dropped into this dilapidated, empty village at the base of a mountain with an egregiously sized Gothic mansion atop it. The village itself has some survivors hiding from the horrors you uncover, and the game does a great job of quickly establishing stakes with some gruesome on-screen deaths, lore, and of course, the 8-foot-tall vampire woman with big vampire assets. This village was particularly engrossing because this game has a virtual reality port for the PlayStation.
What?
And you can literally experience walking through the village, slowly opening doors, and the jump scares. Honorable mention to the village from House of Wax, just because that was too much freaking wax. Seriously, that guy had a problem.
Yes, he did have a problem. He was encasing people in wax.
It's too much. This is too much wax.
Yeah, that was his problem. His excessive obsession with wax, not the murders. The murders were fine.
Yeah,
that's a good answer. I really like that game. That's a very creepy game, and it has a fun city set pieces there. Good answer.
Awesome.
Next we have Baby Can You Dig Her Sam, who says, well, we all know that King really knows how to do a creepy town. Salem's Lot was the first King book I ever read, and the lot felt a lot like the town I grew up in. I read that book when I was 11, that tweener time where I was shedding the dandelion-wide whimsy of endless perfect summer days and starting to see the rotted underbelly that would have me fleeing to live with my grandparents in the city just 4 short years later. Then he added the vampires. Killing Mark's parents shamed the Catholic priest into exile, slowly sucked away the life of the town without anyone even taking notice. In real life, the coal mines and natural gas companies have vampired away more of the small towns in southwestern Pennsylvania. Literally entire towns no longer exist. That is creepy. Man, that's a good answer. If only that movie had done a remotely good job of capturing any of that. Unfortunately, it did not.
Can't wait to watch it and just love it.
All right, that's all this week. Thank you, everyone, so much for answering those questions. This was we got a lot of answers to this. I know people are always kind of frustrated when their answers aren't randomly selected, but we got a whole lot on this one. So that's
we
why.
did. That's right.
And I think we're going to get a whole lot on this next one, Matt, because what is our question? The book just keeps offering us perfect new things to ask questions for. So what is our question for next week?
This week's question, what's your favorite prison arc or gladiator competition? Or both.
Yeah, I mean, the thing behind this is I couldn't decide which of those two things I wanted to go with, so I just wrote them both down. And Matt was like, oh, I thought you were intentionally doing both of them. So here we are.
Yeah, and the thing is, I feel like many gladiator stories involve a prison break, and many stories involving prison involve some kind of combat. So, get creative.
Yeah, I agree. Enjoy. Yeah, do an either or and.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
All right, folks. So that is it for us this week on Kingslingers. Next week, we reach the penultimate episode covering Fairy Tale. We will work through chapters 24 through 28 of the novel, probably setting all things up for our grand climax. Make sure you read those sections and check back next week.
Yeah, remember you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com, over on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and of course on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia.
And if you want some stuff, you want to go to what is the website again? Is it My Shopify? It's doofmedia.myshopify.com. I nailed it. No notes, no edits, just throwing it in just like that. doofmedia.myshopify.com. Where it's starting to get cold out there, Matt. It's starting to get a little chilly out there.
Yeah.
Get yourself a Podcast Me hoodie.
Yeah. Is your head cold? There's a beanie.
Yeah. Or a pillow.
A pillow to rest your head on and contemplate the propagation of the time wave.
Exactly. Propagate that time wave. It's the only way. Head to doofmedia.myshopify.com and get some cool stuff. New stuff showing up every so often. We'll definitely have some new merch there for our Flanagan show as we start to gear up that in the coming weeks. So please keep checking back at doofmedia.myshopify.com. Hope you get some cool stuff. I really like it.
Yeah. And if you like Kingslingers and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. You'll get access to the whole backlog of all the bonus podcasts we've done, including our discussions of the TV show Castle Rock, which, as Scott said earlier, is wrapping up. But we're going to be doing something else after that. So stay tuned.
I think we already got it lined up what we're going to do. We'll announce that once we actually start doing it. But make sure you don't miss it. But of course, if you cannot afford to to donate to us, that is okay. You can help out by continuing to share this podcast, and of course by leaving those wonderful ratings and reviews. If you haven't left a rating and review, now is the time to do so. They really, really do help us. Please consider doing that. This week's Spotlight review comes from longtime listener Steve Livingroom. I recognize that name. We met Steve in Bangor. Thank you, Steve, for submitting this review. They give us 5 stars and say, best podcast out there. Out of all of them, Matt. Out of all of them.
Out of just the best. Well, okay.
This is by far the best podcast out there. The flow is amazing, going deep into King's Dark Tower series each episode, making the series so much more understandable and enjoyable. Their friendship, analysis, and comedy work so well as a team. Their style of breaking down scenes and sentences and their passion for the works perfectly. I've recommended the show hundreds of times and will keep doing so. Thank you, Size, for the entertainment and insight, long days and pleasant nights. Comedy.
And may you have twice the number.
Comedy. I'm going to put comedy on my resume. Put funny. Skills.
Thank you so much.
Skills, Matt.
Yeah.
Funny.
Funny. Was recognized in a review as being funny.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. That was incredibly kind of you. We appreciate you. We appreciate your long time listening with us, and of course, we do thank you for recommending. Steve's not kidding, by the way. When I see people post about the Dark Tower on the subreddit, sometimes not our subreddit, but the Dark Tower subreddit, I very often see Steve going, "Hey, there's a podcast that's talking about that book. You should listen to it." So, Steve, you're doing the Lord's work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we really, really do appreciate that.
And thank you to everyone who has had and continues to submit those reviews. We really appreciate every single one of you. You international folks whose reviews I think actually there's a way for me to see the international review, so maybe I'll try to look for some of those next week. I know there are people doing it, but the basic interface doesn't show it for me, but I'll figure a way. So we thank you all. Thank you for taking the time. It really does help, and it means a lot to us. It's good for us to see the feedback, both positive and occasionally negative. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, folks. We'll see you back here next week for Fairy Tale Part 6, Long Days and Pleasant Nights.
And may you have twice the number.